Our show wouldn't exist without you listening. But if you want more information on how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or just to stay in touch, go to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Flipping the Lid with Brian Bogert, and I am Ashley Bogert. Brian likes to say I'm his better half, but I think that I am just part of his whole. And thank you for tuning in today. So the reason you're hearing my voice, for those of you that are not watching, instead of Brian's, don't worry, he is still here. However, it is time for a joint episode where you get a deeper look into our life together with our crazy zoo and our crazy children. So welcome.
Well, nice introduction, dear. I always love sitting down and having conversations with you. And, the whole concept of flipping the lid is that we want to flip the lid inside the lives of others. And so we started with us, and we're going to continue on a regular cadence with us because we live this way. We are consistently doing the work ourselves. We believe in vulnerability and authenticity. But that also doesn't mean that everything's easy. So though we're going to do this frequently to keep people in the loop with our world, part of it's also to show the struggles, the parts that hurt, the parts that maybe aren't as glamorous, because life's not all about the highlight reel.
It is not. And you know what? We do spend a lot of time laughing because our life is pretty funny sometimes. So today we don't have like a specific direction. We've introduced ourselves to our listeners, and if they've gotten this far, they probably know a little bit about our family. But, something kind of funny happened. We had a first that we haven't had in a while last week. And the thought just occurred to me how crazy it is when you get older and it's time to make new friends, or maybe like be in a social situation with people that you've never hung out with before. And I feel like we went on a first date last week for the first time in a while. Only our kids came with us.
Yeah. I'm just going to say even who it was with, because it's just funny how it all happened. We've got multiple live shows, and one of the live shows that I co-host with my buddy David Meltzer. And I really enjoy that I get to meet people from his world respectively as well. We had a guest on maybe a month ago, Buck Wise, who used to be the chief marketing officer for Cardone Ventures, and he's built and sold 3 agencies. He's just a really incredible human, but marketing mind. But it was a little bit of a doppelganger situation because we both got on and we've got similar haircuts, both have beards, both wear glasses. Like we were like literally dialed. And there was just one of those instant connections that we felt. So when we took it offline and I learned that he lives locally for us, that doesn't happen. Most of the time I'm meeting people from all over the world, but very infrequently is somebody in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. And so when we discovered that, we're like, all right, well, we need to get together. Let's figure out lunch. And then next thing I know, it was, hey, why don't you and your family come over for dinner and we'll all swim and hang out. So though we've done lots of little get-togethers, it was kind of like a blind date because we'd spent 15 minutes on a live together, had no other conversation after that. And it was like, well, let's just blend in everything all at once, spouses and kids and all the roles we play, and see how it works.
Yeah, definitely. It was so funny too, because I feel like friends and life and the flow of that changes probably, right when most people would be graduating college or like around kind of like your early 20s. And the way you make friends changes because it goes from like the people that you go to school with, maybe the people that you work with, to the people that your kids hang out with, or people who kind of live similarly or are in your immediate area, because it gets so hard to juggle work and school and extracurriculars and all the things that are now part of our life as parents with school-age children. And so like we just don't meet people that often. We've joked about, at least I have with my friends, how funny it would be if there was like a dating app for adults or for parents, but it would be like a friendship app, because it's like, I don't know. I feel like swiping would be kind of like, oh, that's not nice. But it's like, where else do you go to meet people? So at least I have you. Otherwise, I would meet like nobody, because my life is pretty much very centered around the house right now and our family. But it was so funny because our kids, even like when we were going, they're like, So how did you guys meet? Like, expecting some long story about history with these people. And we're like, well, like legitimately daddy just met them online. Essentially.
Which is so much a part of our reality now, though, which is really interesting, because I would tell you that I've always been in a position where I meet lots of people, right? Just by virtue of the philanthropic work that we've done, the community work that we've done as an entrepreneur who's been on the growth side of building businesses. That's like my job in some ways, is to build new relationships, right? And we've always done it that way. Well, even my speaking and coaching business pre-COVID was very linear and the traditional stage model. Like, oh, I'm going to meet somebody, I'm going to go speak to this organization, but they're going to be here locally, and then we'll see what comes from that. And I didn't really have a ton of exposure online, yet clearly that has now become very, very different. We've leveraged podcasts, we've met lots of people, but what's crazy is COVID, which I thought was going to be more of a challenge, was an opportunity that amplified our reach, amplified our number of relationships, gave us global opportunity in who we were talking to and the friction in talking with them. But what's also crazy about that is I've only met maybe 20% of the people that I've met online in person, right? And so that's been a really dramatic shift as well, as I have deep, deep, deep relationships and now friendships with a number of people who I've never even met in person. Yet I feel like I've known them since I was a kid. And so the way that we're learning to navigate this whole human experience and relationships and connections and friends, it was complicated before. It's more complicated now because there's just so many different mediums in which we can do it.
Yeah, I agree. Because you meet so many people online and virtually, I guess my question for you is, do you notice that everybody has this like raised capacity to connect virtually now as a result of COVID? Or is it just as hard as it maybe was previously to feel like you're getting like a genuine view of what that person is, to be honest?
I think we're far from having everyone be in a position where this is how they're living and operating right now. I think what it exposed was really good communicators versus people who can talk and pull the guys over, right? When you're on a virtual interaction, you have to be even more clear in your communication because we're not able to read the energies in the same way. We're not reading the micro expressions in the same way. And we know that 55% of communication is in the nonverbals. And so I found that we immediately saw a separation between people who were already solid communicators. We saw another group of people who elevated their level of communication, which then deepened their ability to connect. But what I find largely is that because it happened in such a quick way, in such a forced way, lots of people got really tired of being on screen.
Yeah.
And there has also become this reversed pattern where we used to see everybody with their cameras on. We'd get in a big group environment, and because everybody was so desperate to see people for those 3 to 6 months when, regardless of your beliefs, most people weren't seeing a lot of people.
Right.
It's just interesting because now it's almost like we've forgotten the privilege and opportunity of what all these connections can do, and people are starting to shut their cameras off. We see more and more people that, unless you are really intentional about driving a conversation to pull out value, there's a lot more surface level interactions. And in fact, I won't coach a certain type of person virtually ever because they can hide. People can hide behind a screen. They can literally have distractions going on. They can have last minute interruptions that can change the dynamic that we couldn't do the same way in person before. So I've seen some really significant increase, but I've also seen a lot of people retreat. And I think that we're more disconnected now as a society, even though we have more reach than we've ever had.
Yeah. So this is like how our real life works, you guys. I set an alarm every afternoon, so I remember to take my pills, and that's legitimately going off right now. I'm gonna have Matt, our amazing intern, grab my phone and turn off my alarm. I think it's on Brian's desk. Unless I'm sitting on it, which is actually even funnier. Oh my gosh.
this is even more.
This is even funnier because our son was just in here before we started, and he moved my phone. Okay, I'm putting it back on the floor. Everybody, Ashley's phone is on the floor because I will forget. Thank you. Well, okay, so back to that socialization piece for a second, because it came up in two thoughts for me. One is that the way we socialize obviously has changed since COVID. And for me, it's almost like I was already a homebody, but like now I'm just like happy at home. I find myself like going to, run errands or things, and I'm like, okay, what is happening? People seem like angrier on the road, more erratic for sure. And it's just like feels more crowded. And I don't know if that's because people in general have more like flexibility in their schedules, so they're out and about randomly. But I feel like every time I go somewhere, it's crazy crowded. So leading up into like us meeting with this new couple, I don't know why I don't just refer to
Buck and Alley.
Yeah, Buck and Alley. It's like top secret, but not at all. I've made like no qualms about talking about my anxiety and depression that I deal with, but I expected, because normally when I am meeting a new group of people or going to something that's like more of like an event or whatever, I get super nauseous. I get really anxious ahead of time. I'm like sweaty. I'm a total face sweater. So my face starts sweating. It's just, all of it's not good, right? And so I kind of expected, I was like, okay, I'm sure I'm going to get kind of anxious. Speaking of zoo, our cat is here, and you can't see him under the chair, but he's definitely playing. And it didn't happen. I didn't feel that way. And so, I was kind of like pondering what has changed in me and our life and the environment, whatever, that has helped with my social anxiety so much. And there's like a lot of things. I mean, I take medication. Obviously, I've changed some things in how I'm caring for myself like throughout my day. But truly what it comes down to, I think, is this path that we've been on, like getting rid of the trash from our past and really like working on our relationship. I found that I felt going into it like, number one, I'm with like my true partner. So no matter what, I know he has my back. And it was so sweet because like you assured me basically going into it, like if at any point you're super uncomfortable, if something happens with the kids, because, our son in particular, who is here listening, by the way, got all of mama's genes in a lot of ways. And he struggles with some of the same things I struggle with in terms of generalized anxiety and just like public anxiety. And so, that just having all of that experience and knowing kind of what was coming up, you acknowledged and were able to say like, yeah, this could be a stressful event. And these are the ways that, we can support each other and support the kids. And I wonder, I can't like ask a survey right now of our listeners, but I'm curious, like if people can comment, but like how many people deal with those feelings before a social event? Because I feel like we don't talk about it a lot. And I do believe that COVID has probably increased the number of people that experience physical symptoms from social anxiety. But yeah, I'm just curious, like how many people deal with that, or how many people notice that they feel even like that slight nausea or whatever before an event, or, because I think it's way more felt and experienced widely than we would expect.
But I also think that, to your point, I wasn't always aware, didn't always prioritize my family feeling safe and protected in all those environments, because I was more concerned about the outcome of the interaction, of where that relationship could go, what opportunity could exist. And I think even for you, in a lot of the social anxiety historically, it's been in environments where there is felt and perceived judgment that exists. There's felt and perceived shame that can exist. There's, just this catty competition that doesn't really help anyone grow. It just compresses a lot.
Yeah.
And everybody always seeming to have an agenda, right? And I think where you and I have really worked is getting so clear in who we are, knowing what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what's connected to historical patterns and thoughts because of the trash from our past. But as well, like very clear in our priorities on ourselves and our family first, always, and not through the lens of doing that in a way that would create damage for others, but in prioritizing us.
Yep.
And being okay in any environment walking in and knowing that, hey, if this isn't right, or if this group environment or energy doesn't jive with Blake's autism and anxiety, or if Addison is feeling sensory overload, or she's shutting down because she can't hear because of her hearing aids, or any number of things that could impact you and I. We often would push through some of that pain unnecessarily because we were attached to the outcome of where that could go.
Yep.
Versus realizing that.
And worrying about judgment.
And making sure, like, do we fit in? Are we making a good impression? Do they understand? Do we... And I feel like we're so centered and clear in who we are now that we're also... We don't really, care about, like, if it's good or bad or whatever, because we don't want to be around people that lack depth, that lack heart, that are in that type of place, unless it's to help them on their path, or we see that they're already working and we see who they are beyond it. But largely, we want to be around people that make us feel good, that we know we can have impact in, that we can create safe and protected spaces. And so our whole shift in focus has changed, and even how we go about these, which is probably why you didn't have the same anxiety. But to your point, we've now had extensive conversations with a number of our friends, with our families, and so many people identifying this concept of social anxiety. This, again, it's the armor and protection that we all put in place when we don't feel good in an environment. And I think COVID has really amplified some of the negative aspects of social anxiety, but I think it's also given a lot of clarity to different elements. Like, I used to think I was an extrovert. COVID taught me I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm an extroverted introvert. I need that alone time, and I have to honor that.
And I'm a total introvert.
And you're a total introvert.
Which doesn't mean that I don't like being around people, because I definitely do. But what I find is that I need, like, recovery time for myself, like, energetically, so that I actually, like, replenish.
You don't draw energy from others.
No.
You feel drained, and that's like the big difference, right? An extrovert is somebody who literally gets filled just by being around other people.
And I don't feel apologetic for that anymore. Right. I think there was a big period in my life where I felt like I needed to act like I was more extroverted, because I felt like, well, if people know that really I'd rather, like, or I'd be just as happy at home by myself reading a book, then that makes me weird. Or we put all these different associations with it, like, oh, well, that person's a dork, or they're not outgoing, or they're rude or stuck up. I think there's so many ways to misinterpret that type of personality. And I feel like the most beautiful thing is just the amount of time that we, like, cut off when we're able to just be fully ourselves. Because here's the thing, like, you're going to find out pretty quickly the people that you connect with and the people that you don't, and the people who are going to love and support you and the people who are going to want to pass on a relationship, because you're like, this is me. And, like, where do you fall in that, spectrum? And for the most part, I feel like people appreciate that. And what you end up realizing is that as humans, we have so much more in common with each other than we would have guessed, because all of our insecurities, we tend to like to put onto other people or make assumptions about who they are, how they live their life. And when you can just be real straight out of the gate, then you don't have to deal with all of that crap that's not real.
Yeah. And I think, even to that point, it's like, I think so many people are conditioned to expect how social interactions will go, right? They are conditioned to live inside a certain box, to say the right things, to kind of play the game, if you will. And we just stopped playing the game, right? Like there isn't a game to play other than just being who we are. And what I find is that we can enter into many situations now where, because of those expectations that are conditioned into us, others may be carrying armor when you and I will walk in completely open, right? Like we have this soft front, strong spine concept is, we teach and we live by, but it's literally like, how do we become the protectors and connectors in those spaces? By leading, by example, by being vulnerable and authentic and real out of the gate. And what I find is it's very infrequent when we show up that way that people don't lower their armor and warm up relatively quickly. Some take over the course of an hour or two, some might be 5 minutes, but inevitably we're gonna find if there's depth there, and then we're gonna find where the human side is with people, because that's just what's great. So, like, perfect example, Buck and Allie, right? They partner with Doug Wood and they have this amazing physique show. They are highly disciplined, highly trained in their nutrition and training. And we are, but not to the level that they
I'm
are.
not. I'm not that.
But
yeah, I'm not trying to make any claims here for myself, but
fair.
But I love where you're going.
And the point is like, we ultimately, like, we could have like stayed in that place, but we ended up getting to a place where they were talking about how much of foodies they are, how much cake like Allie loves,
and love cake.
Like Allie, and so like Allie like expressed that she loves this cake, and I looked at her and I'm like, do you like love cake, or like you see a cake and if there's a full pan you're gonna crush it? And she's like, oh, I'm gonna crush it, right? We got to talk into experiences around that valley of despair that happens after competition for so many performers, and the relationship with food and what that looks like. And we had depth. We talked with them about real life stuff. We talked about family and travel, and not every social environment gets there.
Right.
Especially in that amount of time. And I find that when we can be more real and more in the moment, it shortens that amount of time, at least in how we facilitate it for others.
This is kind of like an interesting twist in thought for me, because what that has brought up is the concept of, not so much trying to fit in, but, the buzzword around it is imposter syndrome. It came up in a training call that I was on this week. It has come up in some like personal conversations. And here's the funny thing, when I'm thinking about imposter syndrome and what that means and feels like to me, what I've realized is that if you are being like 1,000,000% authentic, which is hard to do since that's not even a real number, but if you are being that person, how can you feel like an imposter, right? Because you're just owning who you are. And so I don't really like the name of that feeling, because I think it implies something that isn't true for everybody, because I know that what the term actually means to me is it's fear. It's fear is what it comes down to. It's fear of failure. It's fear of not living up to the things that you're saying you're going to do. It's fear of being compared to people that are like seen as being on your same level, and having others judge that, you don't measure up. And so what is interesting to me about that is, for me, I've realized what it comes down to is that in this current moment, my fear of inaction is greater than my fear of failure. Okay. So every time that I start doubting something that we're doing, and by doubting, I mean more like doubting myself, or feeling like, God, can I actually pull this off? Can I get this next project done? Whatever it might be. I just remind myself, like, well, what's the alternative? And the alternative is being in the same place that I'm at now with no forward movement. Yep. And honestly, like, that's scarier to me than this idea of failure, because if you talk to any person who is considered successful, they're going to tell you they failed 1,000,000 times. And so then it's like, well, failure isn't ever really actually failure, right? It's just the next step on your path to success. And the more we can like desensitize ourselves to those like terms and the conventional ways of thinking about them, the more you begin to realize, oh man, these people that talk about mindset all the time actually are right, which is a total bummer because that means I have to be positive. But even for someone like me who has a hard time mustering up all that positivity sometimes, like if you turn it a little bit and remind yourself of what it might feel like to be stagnant, it makes the whole prospect seem a lot easier.
You've also been really intentional in like creating pattern interrupts though, in the way that you're doing things, looking at things, feeling things, even real time. I mean, you learned a new habit and a new pattern, even with your bracelet. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because you've been catching yourself in moments that's really profound, like, and I say profound, even in moments that seem really simple, like just a simple visual cue for us can change everything.
Yeah. Well, so it came from our amazing and brilliant coach, Krista Mayshore, and really partner, because that's what, she is, which is exciting. And so that's like a little plug. Stay tuned, everybody, because we've got a lot of exciting things happening in our world. But I'm so grateful that she's come into our life because she is like the master of adversity and positive thinking. And she'll be the first one to tell you that she wasn't always. And what I love about that is I had come to her, with a question a few weeks ago. And after a very thoughtful response, she was like, you need to read my book. I really think you need to like put it in your ear and listen to Stop, Snap, and Switch. And it's something that like we had talked about and I knew about. And I mean, I could kick myself for saying this, like back in April is when I should have downloaded it and started listening.
Don't shit on yourself.
I'm not going to shit on myself. I'm just more laughing because everything in life is about timing, right? And I don't think I would have received it as well had I listened to it back in April.
Perfect,
exactly. Because what do you always say? The Brian Bogert quote of the year is the only timing that matters is yours. And it's so true. And this is an example. And so anyway, so I popped my earbuds in and I started listening, and the concept is profound and not new. But the way that Krista's able to relate it and tie it to each and every one of us is amazing. So plug for Krista, go download her book on Audible or buy it on Amazon. But essentially it's this idea, a lot of people have done like the rubber band method. And while that works perfectly for training yourself, I don't appreciate the ouch. So basically this ties it to, get a bracelet or a hair tie or something. And every time that you have a negative thought or a thought that's not moving you forward in a positive way, that you've got to reframe that same thought in a more positive light. And the first thing, what do we talk about? Awareness is the first step to change, right? So the first piece of awareness is, oh, that was a negative thought. I'm going to snap my bracelet, pause, think of how I can reshape that into a more positive thought, and then I switch my bracelet. So it's just a visual, tactile way, which for somebody like me, anything that's visual and tactile is going to mean that it actually makes an impression. And the whole point of doing this is to actually like rewire your brain. And it will if you stick to it long enough. But no, I have never been that person who would even put on a bracelet with that intent, let alone listen to a book that's telling me how to do it. And but here's the thing, like it's helping change my mindset because it makes things that seem scary
less scary. Yeah. I do think that imposter syndrome is a real thing. The visual piece is real. As you know, I tattooed trust, surrender, breathe on my forearm around the time of our anger, but it's still something that I look down on frequently because I get moments of overwhelm. I'll get moments of imposter syndrome. I'll get moments of fear. But this allows me to keep it in moments instead of let it completely overtake myself. But to your point on imposter syndrome, I mean, it's been something that I would tell you I have felt in moments here recently. It's been a long time since I felt it with any kind of prevalence, but it also makes sense because we're in the process right now of building something that we've never done. What's really interesting is every single concept that we're going to be teaching in this amplify waste to wealth process is things that we've done, that we have taught, that many of our clients have implemented, but we haven't had a framework for them before, or a system or a process that kind of kept them into a single place.
Packages it all.
And they've been interwoven when they're relevant versus like a guided path that takes people through each one of the solutions.
Totally. Yeah.
So what's interesting is that the imposter syndrome for me comes from the place of I've never packaged it this way.
Right.
But it's not anything new.
No.
It's all the same things that we do, that we live, that we teach, that we practice every day, that our clients integrate and implement into their worlds. Yet, because we've never sold it as a package, I've done it through our coaching channels alone, it feels different, but it's not. It's the same work that we're doing. It's the same work we do in our community. And so that's what I'm really excited about as we shift into this, is it's the first time that everything we've built in the last 8 years in this business is ultimately a part of this process. All the lessons, all the investments, all the failures, right? And the reality of it is for me, imposter syndrome is less about fear. For me, I experience it as any gap between who I am today and who I know I'm capable of being. And how do I close that gap so that I can feel like I am the person that is going to have this approach that works, that does get amplified, that has huge impact, when today we've never packaged it or sold it in the way that we're about to. And so I know it's going to work. Otherwise, we wouldn't have spent the last 5 months building it. I know that it is going to impact people's lives. I know the way it will connect and convert for folks. However, I still don't have the external proof that it's real.
Do you know what I picture as you're describing that experience? Is I picture you like at an open door, and the door's open and it's waiting for you to walk through, but literally you haven't walked through yet, because I think it's just like the nuance of that, you know, where I'm capable of being versus where I am. I feel like the cognition about that should be your clue that you actually are at the place that you want to be. And now it's just processing that fact.
But we still as human beings need an external physical cue to even indicate progress sometimes, right? So even just like the stop, snap, switch, the switching of the bracelet, they're a physical visual reminder that allow us to center in the now. They allow us to experience it as real. This is no different than us launching our first retreat that we hosted back in May, right? I've facilitated, I don't know how many retreats. I've spoken at I don't know how many retreats. This is the work that we do all the time. We do it in our groups and communities, but it was the same thing leading into the retreat. It was like, I knew it was going to work. I knew that it would be there, but there was also, I hadn't done it yet. And so to me, imposter syndrome more often than not is I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
And so if we view that just like we would view overwhelm, which means that we're in a growth period, that we're about to walk through that proverbial next door, we're about to close this chapter and start writing the new one. Like that's what I had to center in a couple of weeks ago, is that like every time we've been on the brink of something we're walking through the next step, we're shedding the next layer, we're creating the next opportunity. Almost every time it feels this way. It feels like we're starting over. It feels like we're at the start line, when in reality, we've been running a marathon and we're in the final sprint, but it doesn't feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. I think everybody experiences that. That's the whole point.
And so if we have the ability to have belief in our future self, and we have the ability to recognize the path that we're on and what it could mean, then that's how we start to close the gap into living into who we know we can be and are capable of being versus where we are now, is partially through the visualization, partially through mindset, partially through reminder, but also through really trying to pay attention to the progress that we consistently have. Because it's really easy to start a new pattern, a new habit, and have it feel like it's not working. But just like what we talk about with our concept of embracing pain to avoid suffering, suffering doesn't just develop overnight. It develops after years of compounding, consistent choices that have led to a certain place, right? Like when my weight has fluctuated up and down, when someone all of a sudden is, in a really horrible place in their relationship, it didn't get there overnight. You don't just flip a switch and like you get into the bad place overnight. But yet when we try to reverse the negative impacts or patterns that we've had in our life, we'll try something for 2 weeks and then be like, well, it didn't work, right? It didn't happen fast enough. And so we have to really understand the perception of time and how do we actually lean into this, because the negative things never just happen overnight, but sometimes they seem like we just wake up one day in pain and it doesn't go away, right? But it's really been years of that, all those choices. Same thing to be true. And we say this all the time in the work that we do. You don't just realize you have trash, open up your lid and just dump it out and it's all gone. No, it's more like a dimmer switch, right? We don't flip a switch. It's like a slow progression until all of a sudden the light's all the way on. This is no different. And so that's what you and I consistently are reminding ourselves of and closing that gap together as partners. But there's a lot of people who are on a solo journey, who are solopreneurs, who don't have a partner in life that's also helping them in business. And so how do those individuals start to close that gap faster, right? It's through visual reminders. It's through those physical things that we can tangibilize and hold on to, because that's all we're trying to do in life, is to center into whatever's real. The only thing real is what's right in front of us. And we can only live into that person and walk through that door if we can center in what's real right now.
Which is a really difficult concept for people that are used to being told they have to plan, because I think that some of that planning and that ingrained tendency for me to think always ahead. First of all, I have to, because I manage our household in that way. And so probably because I'm someone who is naturally good at it, and planning makes me feel secure. And it's like, especially when you're younger, I think it's ingrained in you that like the ability to plan ahead is like this amazing life skill, which it truly is. And it has a place. But what I hope to teach our kids is that like, it's okay to be able to turn that off. And in fact, there's times when you have to, because for me, this concept of being in the moment actually applies to my relationship with money. And we've talked a lot about this. For me personally, is one area that I still have a lot of growth to do because of my emotional attachment to money and how I equate that to feelings of safety. And I actually am so tied to money and like my concept of it and is it enough, all of that, that if I'm feeling scarce around it, that simple thought of scarcity around finances is enough to put me into a downward spiral. And what's funny about that is it doesn't matter if I know that like we're safe and we're good and we're great in a moment. If I'm worried about something that's a month ahead or down the road, it will truly take the joy out of
right now,
the day and the moment for me. Yeah. And so something that I've started using, and it started in regards to that relationship, that emotional, unhealthy relationship that I have, but I've started to apply it in other areas of my life, which is the question, am I safe right now? Am I okay? Am I safe right now? And if I can say, yes, I'm okay and I'm safe right now, then that's like my cue to myself. It's like the permission that I have that I can just relax in that moment and enjoy what's in front of me. And it seems silly that as like someone who clearly has all of this privilege, that piece would still haunt me. But it does. It's real.
Just like everyone else, that's a piece of trash from your past. And the reality of it is, even what you just said, the wording on it was different. But when we get people to the place where they can actually have awareness, take ownership, unpack what's necessary, understand the concepts of flipping the lid and scanning the can, and they know how to move, right? How does the emotion move in my body? How does it move through my world? How do I move through it? We always say And almost everyone can identify that moment when they feel triggered, right? Like the thought of scarcity crosses your mind. Shit, I'm now in this emotional reactionary response that's due to this cellular memory.
Yep.
Right. And so if at a minimum, we can raise our awareness in that moment, own the fact that, yep, this is something that happens to me. It doesn't mean anything's wrong with me. Remove the shame and blame. Then it allows us in that moment to ask ourselves some questions. Now, what you just did is very similar, but the two questions I asked almost everybody to do is, hey, when you feel that, pause in that moment, take a breath and ask, am I reacting to what's right in front of me or the trash from my past? Okay. And then the second is, what am I protecting right now? What I like about your question leading is it really challenges in a binary perspective. Am I safe right now?
Yep.
It's a yes and no question. And so if they haven't done the prior work, they don't know where to look, they haven't done PAC to be able to answer, yeah, this is trash from my past, or man, I don't know what I'm protecting. The mere question of, am I safe right now? Yes or no, or maybe even in some cases, allows people to at least see where they are in this moment so that they can start to connect the dots moving forward. But that's beautiful. Am I safe? Pattern interrupt. Yep, I'm safe right now. My financial needs are met, my emotional needs are met, my physical needs are met, and my spiritual needs are met. So I'm good. That means I don't have to focus my attention on this, which means I can now center back in this moment.
Yep.
Same type of thought process, though, that we're trying to get people to in terms of how they're pausing and what they're connecting it to.
You know, it's interesting. As I was listening to you, I'm like, oh, hey, I've started doing this even in our relationship, because I think that for us, like, we understand the language of safety. And so one of the things that I've started doing to communicate with you is say, like, I'm not feeling safe in this conversation right now, or I'm not feeling safe in our house because of I'm on sensory overload and I need to like show my caveman brain that I'm safe and I need to take a break. And so I think even for people struggling to communicate those types of things with a partner, I think safety is a common human experience. The concept of safety and what it feels like to not be safe is, you know, sadly, some people can't even articulate what it feels like to be safe because they have never felt safe emotionally or physically maybe a day in their life. Yeah. So in some ways, the concept of, you know, feeling unsafe is something that can connect us. And in communicating that to a partner or to a family member, I think there's a lot of power in that concept. And I think it also is a great way to ask people that you care about. You know, we tell people all the time, have you ever asked your wife, like, what makes her feel loved? Have you ever asked your husband how he like receives appreciation? Yep. But I think it's just as critical to ask people what types of behaviors make you feel unsafe.
I agree.
Because safety in a relationship is, like, honestly, probably for me, the most fundamental building block, because it also wraps trust into safety. And so it's almost like you get two bonuses in one. But I think that extends to all of our relationships, because this is something that we talk about with even, you know, clients who are running businesses. It's like your ability to make your employees feel safe is
prospects and clients.
Right? It's directly correlated to your ability to convert and grow.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do think that safety is really interesting. And as you know, when we were first unpacking some of our stuff with in therapy and counseling, when we were going to marriage counseling, which we still go when we're able to. Yeah,
we can get.
It was really, that was one of the reminders is that she really put that prompt in my mind. It's like, does Ashley feel safe right now? Because as my elevation and my anger would come into those places, I didn't always feel safe. But the reality of it is that sometimes we also just have to be really real in a moment and recognize what is going on around us. Like right now, while we're having this conversation, our two kids have come into the room. There was some arguing that was taking place in the background. I was noticing myself getting triggered in moments because we were clear with them ahead of time. Now, instead, we've continued in this conversation. We have not reacted. We have not raised our voices. We've not done any of that because we did set the very clear expectation with both of them ahead of time. what this interview would look like, and sometimes when we're in the studio. But life happens. We need to pause in moments and to pivot. And so in this case, is there anything else further on safety that you would like? Otherwise, I think that that's what I want to do, is shift the environment so that we all get back to safety and probably wrap on this episode.
I had this great idea for a question that I wanted to ask you to end on.
Yeah.
And I completely forgot it.
You forgot the question.
Yeah. But I would like to point out that for those people watching, if you're just listening, then you got to go to YouTube so that you can see the video. But this is Sammy.
Oh boy.
And she's kind of like, the biggest diva of the household.
She's your emotional support dog.
No, I'm her emotional support human.
Yeah.
And then we have our awful cat who's been scratching on all of the furniture.
He's the OG.
He's the OG.
Yeah. But anyway, it's okay that you forgot the question. I think it's really fascinating when we start looking at the things that make us connected, the things that deepen relationships, those moments that cause us to retreat, armor, and protect. And they happen in so many moments throughout the day that we don't always pay attention to, we don't always pause on, we don't always reflect on, but we all have the ability to. It's partially just giving ourselves the permission and recognizing that this is a conversation that can be normalized. And so as things happen, as life changes in those moments when we aren't living into who we know we're capable of being, even if we're the best version we can be right now, thoughts, emotions, and restrictions start to seemingly appear in our lives that don't have a purpose, that don't serve us on where we're going and who we're serving. And so some of those are hopefully going to be some key takeaways for you, because at the end of the day, that's something I want you to be able to ask yourself in every moment, every relationship, every deal. Do you feel safe? And are you facilitating or interacting in a way that's making the others involved feel safe? If we all put safety as the number one priority, and we did that through a lens of love, I think a lot of this resistance would go away. But it does require each and every one of us, and you especially, to flip open your lid and scan your can.
See you next time.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is, if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.